Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. This video is following on from others that have been about a specific genus or a group of genera that are linked together in some shape or form. And today we're going to look at the Cattleya alliance, the plants that I've got within that, including including one group that I have a couple of that, quite honestly, in my mind, they just don't fit. I'm not sure that they're in the right place. We've also got name changes going on and all sorts of weird and wonderful things in this sort of thing. Right, first of all, once upon a time I had a lot of actual Cattleyas, mostly hybrids, but I had some species and everything like that. And round the other place they didn't do bad. Unfortunately, they are scale magnets, so I was always battling with scale on the Cattleya, and unfortunately the sheer numbers that were capable of multiplying on those particular plants, trying to keep on top of them was not easy, on the grounds that Cattleya leaves and bulbs do not absorb sprays very easily. They're resistant, they're almost waterproof, so they don't take on the systemics. So they are difficult to clear. The Bois du Val scale are resilient little blighters at the best of times, and they seem to love Cattleyas and they hang on in there. They get down in the leaf crevices, they can get under the pseudo bulbs on the roots, they just keep coming back. So I was always battling with the scale, point number one, and several people on YouTube had a go at getting rid of scale by dunking their plants in a bleach solution, and I'd seen it work, and I'd also seen the plants coming to no harm, providing you followed certain guidelines. So I thought I'd have a go, and it probably would have worked if I hadn't done it wrong. But basically, instead of using standard bleach diluted in water, the bleach that I used was a cleaner type of bleach, so it had other things in it. And basically it didn't do my Cattleyas any good at all. A lot of the root systems failed, and I lost quite a few as a consequence of the treatment. That doesn't mean to say if you do it properly it doesn't work, I'm not saying that. My version didn't work, I did it wrong. Hello? How does he know? He was sound asleep on the settee in the sunshine when I started this video, and the instant I start filming he wants to go out, so I have to break off and open the fucking door. Come on, out you go. Oh, every time, almost without fail. Anyway. Yes, so that got rid of quite a few of my Cattleyas. They wouldn't recover, they wouldn't grow afterwards, they just went downhill. So there was that. In addition to that, those that I managed to get some new growths going from, rescued elements of those Cattleya to try and grow them new roots, new bits like that. The scale came back, and that's when I did some more research on the Bois du Val scale, and basically they have toxins in their mouth parts, so when they bite in and you get little marks where they've been, they're actually introducing toxins, and in the numbers that I had, especially on the mounted ones that I tried mounting, they actually destroyed the base of the pseudobulbs by these toxins getting in there. So they weren't successful, but they should have been. The environment was good for them. I had the light, I had the heat, everything was right, but the scale and the mistreatment that they got from the bleach job that I did just took most of them down. When I came round here I didn't have many left, and I've lost a few since I got here. But in this alliance you've also got the Prosthecheas, or Anacheliums as I think some of them are now called, but they will not make up their mind. So I quite like Prosthechea as a name. I've known it for years. I quite like it. Anachelium is something that seems to have cropped up relatively recently. And they keep changing. They'll go into one, then move to another, then come back where they started from. You know. So call it what you like. Call it Fred. You'd be just about as near. So anyway, we'll have a look at these. As far as looking after Cattleya types are concerned, they do like a wet-dry cycle and they like it to be quite quick. So you need something that really is free draining and dries quite quickly. You know, medium, chunky bark, that sort of thing. They'll grow in other stuff, but I tend to use organic, so I'd be using larger bark chunks. And you need to give them a good soak. Yeah, even literally dip the pot if necessary, if they're not hydrating enough by pouring the water through. Get them absolutely hydrated, let them dry. And the quicker that happens, the better, and then repeat. And that's it. And because you're watering so often, if they're being looked after in that manner, you can have quite weak feed levels and feed almost constantly. Many Cattleyas will grow constantly, but there are some within the Cattleya alliance, as well as the actual Cattleyas, that do have a distinct rest period. Now it might only be 2 or 3 weeks, but they're not happy if they don't get it. And some of those rest periods are after a bulb matures and produces a sheath, where the buds are going to come from, it needs a rest, or it won't produce those buds. It will be a blind sheath. And others like a rest after they've bloomed. Otherwise the new growths are weak. So you know, you need to do a bit of looking up on your actual species anyway. I think I remember my purpuratas needed a rest at a certain point. Very sad to lose one of those, because I've only ever seen it once. I've never seen it before or since, and that was it was a lot of purr. It was Cattleya or Laelia, I think, purpurata variety Atropurpurea. So there was a lot of purr in there, and beautiful blooms, and I lost it. So anyway, wet dry cycle important. In the actual Cattleyas, not necessarily, you know, the sort of offshoots, the alliance. 2 main types. You've got the single leaf types, the monofoliates, and then you've got the twin leaf types, the bifoliates. And from experience and listening to others and everything, the bifoliates are far more fussy about getting the timing right for the repotting. And if you don't, they have a habit when repotting of dumping their existing root system. So if you haven't got new roots to replace them, you've got a rootless plant for an amount of time that could be too long for the plant to survive. So you've got to get that timing right, and it pays to do that type of thing with all the Cattleya alliance really. New roots coming, oh, good time to repot then. Unless you're in the middle of a phase, you know, you have to bear in mind geography as well. Where do you live? What sort of day lengths have you got? Heat, all that sort of stuff. Like here now, my day lengths are far too short for Cattleyas to be growing. They're not dormant as such, but they're not growing. They're doing little to nothing because it's too short a day for them to get going. In addition to that, it's probably a bit cold for them. Most Cattleyas are up the middle to the higher end of intermediate. Some go into the warm end. There are a few that are cooler growers. Certainly the Laelia anceps that I've got is a cooler grower. Prosthecheas can be treated like the Cattleyas, except for they would probably like a mix that stays moist a bit longer than your fast wet dry cycle. So they could do with a mix that holds moisture a little bit longer. They don't like being soggy, yeah, they don't like being wet for any length of time, but they like some moisture around the roots most of the time. So they're a bit different. And that's what I've got, so that's all I'm going to talk about. Those are the ones that I've got. And what else? In the main, reasonable temperatures. They like bright light in the main, but Cattleyas can burn. They might not seem like it, thick, fleshy, leathery leaves, oh, they're, you know, hard as nails. No, they can still burn. So watch your direct sun. Some can take it, but they tend to be acclimatised over a period of time to be able to, and probably not all day. I wouldn't do it personally. I'd keep them out of direct sun, keep to filtered sun with early morning and late afternoon bright sun. Yeah. But here, without the day length and without the warmth, I'm not growing much at the moment. They're just sitting there doing little to nothing. So that's that. Yeah, so I've got them all out on the table except one, which is on the floor. That's the big one. So we'll twist the camera around. Actually, no, we won't. We'll leave the camera where it is and I'll hold the plants up. I always make that. I always make the original decision, let's twist the camera around, and then change my mind with these sort of things. So the first one on the floor is this is one of these so-called Chileanum thingies, whatever it is. Desperately needs a repot and a split. It's all hanging out over the pot. You can see a nice new growth coming here. Perfect time to take that section of that plant off. Round here we've got new growths, but this plant would easily split into 3 at least, possibly 4. And most of those roots in the pot are old and tired. They're not doing a lot of good, so it needs doing. It's currently in bloom. It's got a single spike on it. It's bloomed on and off. We've got another spike starting here in the top of that growth. That'll turn into a spike. But it desperately needs splitting and sorting out. The blooms on this are very attractive, but there's not much of them. They're very small and they're really spread out. But they've got a nice pattern on them, you know, dark dots on a green background, upside down blooms, typical Prosthechea type. Yeah, and that is Pachycephalum, Anachelium pachycephalum, says here. That one lives on the floor, basically because it doesn't fit anywhere else at the moment, so it lives down here. Oh. And just as we get going, somebody now needs to come in again, of course. Come on. His trip to the vets went okay. The vet was very nice, actually got the clippers out and took the last few of his bad matted bits off his fur. So he's got a couple of bald patches now. It soon grows back. I mean, if you think last time he went, he had most of his back end done from about halfway down to his tail. And that's all grown back again. And of course, when it grows back, it's all nice, shiny, you know, new fur. It looks really nice, all smooth, like when he was a kitten. But yeah, and he had his claws clipped and everything. We did have a few hissy fits this time, which he's normally very patient, and he normally has a growl here and there. But this time we had some real hisses. Right, so what have we got next then? Oh, some of these they fit down in their black pots and they're difficult to get out. Right, this is an actual Cattleya, and this is the one with a bit of red in its name. It's Siang Yu Red Pearl variety Red Dragonfly, and it is a proper Cattleya. It's a very poor rooter. It always has been, ever since I got it. The new growths produce some roots, but they're just not very good. I think it needs to be compact in its pot. So I think its pot's too big. I'm not sure whether it's coming up for a repot or not, but I do see some algae in the bottom of the pot. We do have some roots. I wouldn't say this is a good root system though, but it's never had a good root system. I mean, up near the top here, under this new growth, there's some new roots sort of pushed out across the top of the pot. It's not a very good root system, but it's got some. And this one survived the scale treatment and has grown on since. But you can see that over time you can end up with quite a tatty looking plant, because eventually you get leafless bulbs. They just make the plant look untidy, basically. But what we've got here is this growth here has got a sheath, and that's actually got a spike in it. So that will produce some buds, lovely bright red blooms. And then the other growth round here is a newer growth. So that hasn't reached the stage of producing its sheath yet. So that's that one, lovely blooms, and I won't say it's growing well because it's not, but it needs coming out of this pot and sorting out, get rid of some of the back end of the plant, and see if I can sort of get it to root better by having it in a more confined space. Doesn't always work, but a lot of the time it does. So that's that one. Right, if we play front to back, that'll do. Right, so this one is, it just about fits in the Cattleyas alliance. This one is a Orchids, which basically is a Prosthechea crossed with something else. I've forgotten what it is, but I think despite the two genera that have gone into it, I think it still remains as part of the Cattleyas alliance. But this is where we get my, I won't call it my confusion, just the air of confusion. Do these look like Cattleya bulbs? No. Do they look like more like Oncidium type bulbs or Brassica type bulbs? Yes. It looks wrong to me. This does not look like a Cattleya. It doesn't look anything like a Cattleya. Anyway, this one is Black Comet. I won't say it's growing well, but it is a small plant. It looks like, by the size of the oldest pseudobulbs, it looks like it's been grown on from a seedling. Yeah, so this was once possibly in a flask and has been grown on since. Nonetheless, it's still a young plant, but the latest growth's got two good leaves on it and it's got a sheath. It will bloom eventually, but again, this type does actually produce the sheath, mature the bulb, everything goes like that, and then it doesn't bloom, and you think, and then eventually it does. It just has a pause between reaching maturity on a bulb and actually deciding to bloom. So as you can see on this type, when they start out, when they're relatively young, the bulbs are covered in sheaths. If you've even got a whiff of scale in your environment, get those sheaths off. Just peel them back. Get rid of them, because that's where the scale will hide. They should just peel off, yeah? Get rid of them. I'm not going to do it now, I've got other things to do. That sort of job on plants I always do when I'm watering them, which I'm not doing at the moment. This one, all the roots around this side of the pot, which is where the latest couple of growths are. Nothing around the other side. But it has got reasonable roots, it's okay. And given that, yeah, I was going to say, given that greeny label with the bits nicked out of it, that's a spice exotic plant. That's where that one came from. And I do believe I have actually repotted that, so that's been done by me. Right, next one. This is another biggie. Now this is Prosthechea radiata, which I think may now be called Anachelium radiatum, but not in my books it's not, because that's not what I bought it as. I don't like, you know, things changing halfway through my ownership. This one's growing quite well. It's got a back end of a plant that's not really serving much of a purpose anymore, I must admit. These little bulbs around here with no leaves, they're not doing much. Whereas the much larger bulbs which form the front of the plant, many of which have bloomed for me, are doing okay. And then we've got, have we got one new growth or two? Two. So we've got this one here, that's just starting to produce its sheath. And then we've got another one here which is heading to the side of the pot. And is the sheath forming in there yet? Not yet. But those two will both bloom. It's bloomed reliably on all of the new growth that it's produced. It's got an absolute pot full of roots, but round the back end they are getting a bit old and tired. And it's one of those that likes to creep across the top of the pot. And unfortunately, while it was doing that, it was back in the summer when I did get some warmth in here. And so a lot of these roots didn't get down in the media before they dried. That doesn't mean to say it's got a bad root system, but these roots would have been much better if they were down in the media, and they weren't. So they're tired. As you can see, the ones down in the pot tend to be a nice white colour. There's no root activity on this plant at the moment. There's no roots actually growing. There's no root tips because the roots were formed when these growths were quite new. Well, they've grown on since then, produced their leaves, matured, and in one case of, starting to produce its sheath. So, the roots are older now. They're not young roots. The next new growths will produce new roots with growing tips. And I forget when the new growths appear. I don't know whether they appear before the blooms. I got a feeling this one, last time it was in bloom, I think it was doing everything. It had new growths, root activity, and was in bloom. It was doing the lot. So that is Prosthechea radiata in my books. And out of those types, Prosthecheas, that's probably one of the easiest to grow and is probably one of the most fragrant orchids there is. Not just amongst those. However, I've read in several places, plus from experience, the fragrance on this affects people in a different way, and some people don't actually like it. It's a very heady fragrance, it gets in you, sort of thing. I find it wonderful. Hannah can't stand it. At Burnham's they had a load of these in the Orchid Paradise. The specimen plants and the stock plants were all in bloom together, and Hannah had to leave the room. It was giving her a headache. So not everybody likes them. So that's that one. So I just need to do a bit more front to back here. These are the ones we haven't seen towards the front. Right, now this one is what the hell it's called now, I really don't know, because although this was originally named Ivanagara apple blossom, yeah, and I found out in more recent times that apple blossom, when this was registered, was all one word, not two. Nonetheless, on my label it's two, because that's how I had it in the books when I did the label. It's now not Ivanagara, it's something entirely different, which I don't think I've ever heard of. Not in my books. And this plant will not grow properly. This was a good plant once. It never recovered from that root treatment, and it's never grown properly since. And you can see it's stuck a new growth out like from nowhere, out the top of the plant, and it's weak. It's got no decent bulb, and the other new growth's not much better, and the old bulbs just are not up to much. So I think we might take the bull by the horns, and these are the two latest growths, and this one still has some green on the leaves. I think I might take those three bulbs and start a new plant, because although these roots are high, they may continue to grow if they got in some media. There's virtually nothing going on in the pot. There's no roots down in the pot. So the roots this plant has got, those are they, the ones you can see, and they're not in the media. So I don't think it's ever going to do well if I leave it like that. because these are the latest two growths. If it produces another one, it's going to be up in the air from the side of one of these two. So that's no good. So that one, come the longer days and the better temperature, there's no point in doing it now. Yeah, so it's just too cold with short days. It's not growing. That's probably why this is stalled. But it needs going into. I don't want to lose that because that's one of the originals. There have been lots of apple blossom clones that have been produced that have got additional names like apple blossom peach, and I think that's one. But they're not the same as the original. The original to me was special. The colours just were magical. And that's why I don't want to lose this one, because I may not ever get it again. So that's that one. That one does not like as much light as some of the other Cattleyas. Well, bearing in mind it's not a proper Cattleya, it's got other stuff in it, and I don't know what that other stuff is or how one would grow it if one had any of those other bits that have gone into it. So yeah, that does, if that gets too much light, it does burn. And then this one over here is a relatively recent one, has got some troubles. And those troubles are manifesting themselves as leaves going yellow from the tip backwards down the leaves. That has all the hallmarks of a nutrient deficiency. It gets fed and watered the same as everything else. Why would this one be different? Pause for thought. Got an answer yet? It's the only one that hasn't been repotted. I wonder what's in the pot. Because nutrient absorption is dependent on the root's environment. And if that's not right, this may not be getting the nutrients it needs. But something's not right. Okay, these are older leaves. This is the back end of the plant. Yeah? And the front end of the plant is this growth and this growth, which are fine at the moment. And this one's got a nice sheath up the middle, and this one's got a nice sheath up the middle. They will both bloom. And this has been grown on from a seedling, tiny little pseudobulbs at the back end, gradually getting bigger. The biggest one is this one, but the two that I'm growing, because that produced two new growths this time round, the two that I'm growing are the same length but not as fat, but they haven't finished yet. Yeah, although they've got their sheath, they're not ready to bloom yet because these are not fully matured. They will get fatter, plumper. And this one is it's got something else in it yet again that may or may not be in the Cattleya Alliance, depending on the renaming and the stuff that's going on. But it's an Encyclia green hornet, and it's crossed with an epi, I think it was an Cattleya, certainly not an epidendrum, and that was Miva Etoile, which is a cross between two other types. So this one's a more complex hybrid, basically. It's got extra stuff in it. But nonetheless, it's a nice dark bloom, and I like it a lot, and it's growing okay, but it isn't. See, now the growth that these two new ones have come off of, both of the leaves have been sawn off, probably by me, because they probably did this. Answers on a postcard, but to me that looks like a nutrient deficiency, and the plant is drawing down on the existing parts of the plant. Yeah? However, if it was doing that, would the leaves not go yellow from the base first? Because that would be the first port of call to start drawing nutrients down, rather than from the tip. It's certainly not light burn. That'll be the day in here. Anyway, apart from that, it blooms okay, and it hasn't been repotted by me yet, but it could do with doing, because I don't know what's in the pot. Came from Burnham's, I believe, if I remember rightly. Did it come from Burnham's? I'd have to look it up, but I'm not going to do it now. And then last but not least, it's the only one I've got that's in flower that we've looked at recently, but we didn't really look at the plant, we looked at the flowers. And this is another one that sinks down in its black pot. Now this is Laelia anceps, so it is a species and probably has one of my favourite Cattleya type blooms because I just love the colours and the shape. Gorgeous. But it has a trait. It grows incredibly long spikes. That's not a long one, that's a short one. I've seen these well over 1 metre long. I can remember, it goes back an awful long time, so those that haven't been around in the YouTube orchid world long won't know who the hell I'm talking about. Us old timers and old school ones that have been around a long time will remember Brad's greenhouse. And I remember him with his camera looking at Laelia anceps blooms, and they were just above his head, so at that sort of height. Now I don't know whether he was a tall guy or a short guy, but that's what we were looking at. And he said, oh, I suppose I'd better show you the plant. And he backed up. The plant was on the floor. So that's how long his spikes were. Yes. Now this is not growing properly. It does have some roots. It has sort of recovered from the root treatment for the scale, but it hasn't properly recovered. But it's got a piece here that has grown a new growth, this bit, but that was nowhere near big enough or strong enough to bloom. And then the plant forked, and the other fork heading off in this direction has already lost its leaves on its bulb, and it produced this one, which is not really big enough to bloom, but I've let it because I love the colours so much. We've got to try and get this one going again. This little new growth here has produced some roots. This area over here has produced some roots. This is not a good root system. It's not. A lot of it is because, again, it's creeping across the top of the pot and the roots aren't getting down in the media. But I think I've got a couple of roots down the bottom of the pot running round the base. So there are some roots that have gone down in the pot. There's even one coming out the bottom. But it's a poor root system, and as such it's not growing good sized pseudobulbs. The bulbs on this plant should be a lot bigger. So this is in a state of recovery. Shouldn't really have been allowed to bloom. It's only produced 2 blooms. They only last about 3 weeks, maybe 4. So it's not going to totally drain the plant. There's not a lot to drain anyway. Now that is Laelia, which has probably been renamed Cattleya because most of the Laelias did get renamed. But it's a cool grower. And round the other place I made the mistake, because I think apart from last year, I think it's bloomed every year, but it missed one. And round the other place I had a huge big extractor fan at the top of the grow room and a huge inlet fan at the bottom on the shady side. So the idea was the fan at the top sucks out the hot air from the roof area, and then the cooler air from the shadier side got sucked in at the bottom. And I thought, it likes cool air, I'm going to plonk it in the line of fire of the cooler air coming in. And the plant grew quite well, but it didn't bloom. Why didn't it bloom? Because down there it lost its light. They like good light, but they don't like too much warmth. Laelia anceps is a cooler grower. Comes from higher elevations, basically. So that's that. That's my set. There's no point in me getting more Cattleyas unless they are specifically mentioned as being cooler growers, in which case I might give them a go. But again, I would be able to give them enough light in the summer months, but not in the winter months. So you sort of think, is it worth the bother? You know, there's only so much room in here. And the thing is with Cattleyas, they are scale magnets. And in addition to that, they've got these thick leathery leaves along the lines of like a phalaenopsis axe, not typical, not like the plant, but the leathery thick leaves that don't move. So when you pick them up to move them, if they touch another plant, they'll drag it with them or knock it flying. There's no give in them, yeah? And they do tend to knock other plants over as you move them about. You've got to go ever so careful with them, because the thick leathery leaves often sticking out sideways from the bulb. And if you pick that up and there's a leaf sticking out and there's a little plant here, as you pull, it'll just knock it flying, unless you're incredibly careful. Right, so that's another one of these looks at I won't say genus, I'll say genera, because there's a bit of a mix in there. But it is, you know, you've got a Laelia in there, you've got some actual Cattleyas, and most of the rest, irrespective of all the mucking about with the names, are Prosthechea types. So I haven't got a huge variety in the Cattleya alliance, and that number is not going to grow much at all, because most of them would prefer to be warmer than I can do through the winter months. So there we go, hope you've enjoyed that. It's Friday today. By the time I process this, past my lunchtime. I thought things were starting to rumble, I thought it was thunder outside. But yes, by the time I process this, it'll be later on Friday. I'm not sure what I'm going to film tomorrow. I might not, so you might not get a video tomorrow. But we will definitely have a Sunday chat, and we'll have to start working the videos in between the television, because tonight the Rugby Six Nations starts, and that's my favourite rugby tournament. Unfortunately, tonight's match I won't be watching. It doesn't start till about 8 o'clock in the evening. I'm starting to yawn by then, and it finishes too late for me to stay up and see the end of it, I'm afraid. But there'll be another match on Saturday and another match on Sunday. They're more likely to be afternoon matches, so should be able to take part in that. And my reduction in my wine intake is doing okay. I've cut down on the number of bottles a week. Just before it got to double figures. No, not really. But I try and keep my wine now for the weekends, and then it becomes more special, and that's when I tend to have my more special meals. I mean, this week I've had 3 lots of fish, which is just like a piece of breaded fish with some green vegetables, green beans or peas, something like that. That's it. It's a very simple, small meal, perfectly healthy, nothing wrong with it. Tonight we've got 2 nice sea bass fillets, so we've actually got closer to, I mean, it's come out of the freezer, but they were fresh fish when they went in there. So we've got 2 nice pieces of sea bass, probably have some peas with that. And then I'll think of something a bit more special for tomorrow and possibly Sunday. We'll see how we go. And then tomorrow we can open a bottle of wine, and hopefully there'll be enough left to do Sunday as well. That's the problem. There used to be a rule in this house: once the top's off, well, you don't put it back, do you? Well, we try not to do that so often now. Yes, so there we go, and if I don't see you tomorrow on Saturday, I will see you Sunday for the Sunday chat, subject as yet unthought of. Suggestions on a postcard. See you then. Bye for now.